Hello everyone, it's your favorite Shenanigans in Space here, and it's been a hot minute. Sorry, life shenanigans, we'll do that for you know how it is. But one of the things that happened in the interlude was that the trailer for Civilization 7 dropped, and I knew this game was coming out for a while, like we all did, and I was cautiously optimistic. I was hoping for the best, and then this game shot me down harder than when you're one turn away from completing a wonder. I know that's a bit of a harsh statement, but given what I've seen so far, I am not happy. But I want to go into that in more depth, so let's begin. Now, I don't want to be a blind hater and go off about how everything's wrong without acknowledging what I think looks good, which I have to actually start with the graphics because I think this game looks very good. Now, I wasn't a big hater of the cartoony art style that Civ 6 had. It warmed up to me over time, although I still prefer how Civ 5 looked for the most part. But overall, the Civ 7 looks really good. I'm not gonna lie, like I said, the models are a bit off, but I really can't complain. I mean, Civ 6 models at the early trailers look bad too, and this looks way better than that. So I'm not gonna complain about that. And overall, I do think the spirit is in the right place. I know that sounds weird, but I really do think these people love Civilization. I'm not suggesting this is one of those, oh, they don't love the franchise or they're ruining it because of X, Y, or Z. I think the heart's in the right place. It's just, well, I'm gonna be quite frank, I do not like the direction they're going with this. But let's get into that then. Now, I have three big concerns/problems with what the trailer shows the direction Civilization 7 is going, and I'm gonna try to order them from, least to most much of a problem, if that makes sense. Starting with them, the leaders. Not so much the picks as much how they're broadening the concept of leader, instead of being someone who actually led a civilization to then being just insert famous person, basically, because if you just have scientists now, it's just like, I don't like that, okay? The whole point of playing a leader is that you're playing an epic leader of your civilization who can, lead throughout history. And there are so many famous, important, incredible leaders across history, and there's no need to dilute the concept with great scientists or philosophers or artists or whatever. That was just never a need Civilization had. I kind of get it on some of the, probably trying to avoid stagnation sometimes with the roster. This is how you get them not having Napoleon in Civ 6, which still bothers me to this day. But I'm sorry, but I much rather prefer the leaders stay relatively stagnant, if that's what you want to call it, then break the concept of playing a great leader across history, especially because most nations anyone would want to play, for the most part, have at least 3 named leaders that could easily fill the slots without question. So I don't really think that was ever a real problem, especially because they're adding tons of new features to leaders, like with them having more traits and the upgrade traits across the ages, which looks really fun. So even if they were going with the most basic picks they could pick for any nation, then that would be fine because this is a whole new expanded system. And I want to get more excited for the idea of customizing your leader as they go throughout the game, but I just can't get too excited about that because every time I think about it, I think about how they're breaking the concept of great leaders. And the game was already and they talk about representing other famous people, but they were already doing that in Civilization. That was the great people system, where great generals and scientists and philosophers and etc. That's where they went. That was their role in the game. And trust me, if you played Civ 5 and Civ 6, you know how important those guys could be. So it's it was just an unneeded concept. And to add another thing, which I should probably go in the other section, but I'm going to put it here anyway. I don't like leaders being decoupled from their nations. I don't mind if it was an alternate game mode, especially added after the game released. I wouldn't like it necessarily, but for meme potential, I would accept it much sooner than I would accept having non-leaders be leaders in the game, actually. Because, like I said, I can see that kind of being fun for, chaos runs or meme runs or whatever. But, them just being so obviously decoupled just makes no sense to me. I've been always an advocate that there's been a little bit of an untapped story in Civilization with, the great leaders clearly being themselves from actual history, somehow reborn into this new world. And I've always wanted them to actually tap into that as a story potential, but you can't, it gets muddier when they're not building the nations that they come from, ignoring, certain, it makes sense that someone like Abraham Lincoln would build America again, or Cleopatra would build Egypt, but why is someone like Napoleon, who loved France, building, say, Japan? It just makes no sense. And yes, I know obviously you can have a lot of weird meme things happen in Civilization, but I just don't get it. If it was an alternate game mode, I'd be fine with it. But as a core feature, I am just do not approve of how they've done the leaders so far. But like I said, I do think them having leaders that upgrade traits throughout the game is pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. Now, as I somewhat mentioned, the next flaw is with nations themselves in this game. Now, once again, them having more expanded bonuses and more features they get is actually something I don't mind. It's actually quite cool, in my opinion, since I've noticed a progression with Civilization games over time, that over time the nations have become more unique and add more features. I'm cool with that, I like that. What I don't like, was the decoupling of leader to nation, but the second and far more disastrous opinion, in my opinion, is that you do not keep one nation throughout the game. Instead, you switch them out between ages. And I don't like this because this is now, one people may say, but other games have done this. Games like Humankind and I believe Millennium maybe have done features like this, so why is it a problem here? Well, the problem is actually pretty simple. Those were Civilization competitors. They adopted these features, invented these features as a way to compete with Civilization. And I think I could get into Humankind maybe if the game ran on my computer better. And I like the system there in theory. Well, for that game, I like the idea of how Humankind does it. The problem is I like it because that's Humankind's thing. I like DMC, but I wouldn't want all of a sudden Mario to start adopting those tactics out of nowhere in the mainline games. Just as a silly example here, but it gets my point across. And it also, once again, hurts with the theming of Civilization, as Civilization has had this narrative theme going across it of these epic leaders across history being reborn and rebuilding their civilization to stand the test of time. That was a bit of a narrative theme going on since the early games, which is just lost if they're just randomly switching nations. Because, once again, why would say Cleopatra, for example, switch her Egyptian civilization to be Moorish or Ottoman Empire or the Mongols or whatever? It's so weird, I don't quite get it, but I could maybe accept it. Now, granted, I would be pissed off the fact you couldn't just start with someone like America. That would annoy me. And the whole reason is that, some civilizations are more powerful in other ages, and that's hard to balance. And I get the idea of it being hard to balance, but there's also internal structure to that was really well known in Civ 5, if you played Civ 5. Is that some civilizations were better in the early, mid, late game, and you pick your civilization sometimes built around that concept. It wasn't a flaw, it was a design feature that I think the developers of this game have kind of forgot about. It wasn't just always being more powerful at every single point, it was about when your civilization had its strengths. Civ 6 was pretty good at balancing this, where civilizations almost always had something useful, but also clearly had their moments to shine in the tech tree. But here's the worst part, because Humankind, not only did they rip off the whole switching civilizations mechanic from Humankind, but they did it worse. Because Humankind had a very different scoring system, but one of the things it did is that you could switch civilizations every time an age passed, and usually was the tactically best decision, but here's the thing, you were not forced to. You could always keep your older civilization, and it had some bonuses to it. Now, from my understanding, it was rarely, if ever, worth actually keeping a old civilization mechanic, like from a pure gameplay standpoint. But the thing is, Humankind understood that if you start as, say, the Egyptians, you might just want to stay playing the Egyptians, and that's okay. But Civilization forgot this lesson because you are mandatorily forced to switch into different things. You can't, if you're a star as Egypt, you can't not become Egypt. So, it's not change into something else that isn't Egypt. And it's like they literally saw a mechanic, copied it verbatim, and then made it worse. There was no reason not to let you keep the same civilization. Yes, you might say, but it breaks the theme of switching your civilization across time. Well, that's BS because it's not even realistic. There are nations like, ironically enough, Egypt and China, who though have gone through changes and occasional times where they didn't exist, but they're still here. There are some nations, like England, for example. It's over 1,000 years old, give or take. How does that work in the gameplay? There are so many nations that have survived across the ages this game has, that unless they do some weird shenanigans where you have England and then Britain or some weird stuff like that, it's just bizarre. Is that they took a mechanic that already was how they differentiate from Civ 5 and just purely copy it and making it worse. And then that bleeds into the last and probably the most damning issue of the entire game. Because Civilization 7 is completely redoing the ages/era systems. I keep using the terms interchangeably, but basically the eras of ages of the game, you know what I mean, the different like time frames the game take place in. And they did it in the dumbest way possible. Now, because instead of having the roughly 8 that Civilizations had, at least in Civ 5, but I think Civ 4 had about the same ages, but don't quote me on that. I've only played 3, 5, and 6, and Beyond Earth. But like, they did their way, because by the time of Civ 6, they had 8 major ages and then a 9th future age, which they then completely screwed in this game, because now instead of having those ages, you have the Antiquity age, the Exploration age, and the Modern age. Did you catch that? We went from 8/9 to 3. And trying to condense all of human history down to 3 ages really hurts, and it's kind of hard to mechanically condense all that down. And it shows if you look at how the theming, because the Age of Antiquity already feels more like the Roman Age, which is way beyond the start of when civilization really got started. The Age of Exploration seems almost completely ditched the Middle/Dark Ages, and the Modern Age just feels like it's trying to condense all of like the industrial history to today in a time period that's way too short. And newsflash, it doesn't make the game better. In fact, they even did it worse, because one of the most mechanically interesting things about the Civilization games, at least after 3, because 3 had something like this, is that the tech tree was continuous. You could research things out of order and do cool things like that, which do not exist in Civ 7 because the tech trees are split off into each other, meaning that you do not switch tech trees until you move to the next age, which means that all the interesting strategies of when you'd research something has now been significantly cut down. I cannot tell you the number of times I avoided researching a tech or focused on something else to the point of almost comedy, but because I wanted to, or because it helped my strategy, or I was doing whatever, that just can't exist as easily in this game when the tech tree doesn't move on continuously like that. And it was just a very poor idea of how to change it in a way that just removes player interest and fun mechanics in order to keep things more condensed. And I believe the design decision behind this was that they wanted to create these like little pocket mini experiences that were super flavorful, but the problem is, in the process, they've cut down on player creativity and strategizing instead of turning it into a much more kind of like predetermined way the game will play out. And that's a lot of what I've noticed. They kind of try to, I don't want to say cut down on player agency, but it's almost like they want the game to play very particular ways at very particular points that just don't quite mesh with Civilization's design. And this kind of gets into when every age falls apart, there's some kind of calamity you have to go through and blah blah blah. And I'm not necessarily opposed to calamities happening that can mess with you, although I think Civilization 6 probably did this best. But if you look at something like Stellaris, okay, a bit of an oddball, but I'm going to put it here, they could have bad things happen to your nations, crises, all these kind of things, and some of it was not terribly in your control, but it didn't usually directly stab your entire nation building in the back. Yeah, it could affect you, it could do bad things, even collapse you if you're not careful, but you could play around it, you could build resistance to it. But in Civilization 7, sorry amigos, you're just falling down Collapseville at certain points, and there's jack you can do about it. But even Civilization 6 with its rise and fall mechanic of the whole normal age, golden age, dark age, and heroic age, although I do believe it was partially not implemented perfectly, it still understood this concept of you should try to avoid, you should not just be forced into having a bad or dark age. But this game kind of subverted that because, sorry, you're just going to have these bad times and there's nothing you can do about it. And I don't believe that's a very good or fun mechanic. And I don't think it's good for the design of Civilization, as it once again removes player creativity and player interest and replaces it with standardization and what they believe is fun, and just kind of standardizing the whole game from the looks of it. Especially because when you go to an age, is a global mechanic. It's not like you go to ages at different points. So instead of being this more dynamic system, it's much more mechanical in the sense that it's oh, well, we're all going to a dark age, so we can't really do fighting each other or complex diplomacy because we're too busy dying. And listen, these crises are collapses. They aren't just circumstances with potential upsides or downsides. They're just collapsing events for your civilization, which also kind of hurt the fun of the the building of one more turn, building more powerful nations. And overall, I don't think it was a very well thought out mechanic, especially because even Civ 6, for all of its faults, did this idea better. So overall, that's just my quick thoughts, or not so quick thoughts, on Civilization 7. But I'd love to hear what you think, because I'm no expert that can give me like a kind of pre-release copy or whatever. But overall, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Whatever you think, please like, comment, subscribe down below, or just like if you didn't like, leave all your thoughts, and I'll see you all next time. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.